I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from December 8th, 2020. Does anybody on the commission have any comments, suggestions, or corrections to be made?
I do have a correction. It's a very minor one. I don't care if it gets corrected, but on page 22, it reads Commissioner Hemmer, Hemmer, and the correct spelling is Hemer. I think it's pretty known what that is, so if we don't want to correct it, but I don't know what the rules are on doing that. So, and they were very lengthy and fulfilled notes as they were. So I'm assuming that it's Tempest that does it. She did an excellent job.
It's actually our newest planner, Janine, has been doing it. So
Janine.
Yeah, so she's learning a lot as she goes, which is great. So, and I'm sorry.
Excellent job.
Good, thank you. Good, thank you. I'll let her know.
Yeah, it was extensive, to say the least.
Yeah.
Well done. Anybody else? No, everybody looks satisfied. All right, I'll entertain a motion then to approve the notes as presented. Oh, as amended.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from December 8th, 2020 as amended.
I'll second that motion.
All right. All those in favor, aye? Or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, seeing all ayes, all those opposed, nay? All right. Meeting minutes for December 8th, 2020 are approved, moving us solidly into 2021. All right, informational items. Are there any informational items from staff this evening?
The only thing that I guess I would add is that they just wanted to let you all know that the Waverly PD hearing that was scheduled for last week during the storm obviously got canceled. So that is moving to March 2nd, just as an informational so you are aware.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else, Laura?
Nope, not from me.
Okay. Let's move on then to work session items. So actually audience participation, excuse me. Do we have anybody in the audience this evening, Vera?
We do have an audience member, and I'm checking to see if they have their hand up to make any comments. And I don't see, yes, we do. Renelle Coburn has raised her hand to make some comments. So I'm going to allow her to talk.
Renee, if you're there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you, before you testify, would you please state your name and your...
Hold on, I'm not going to testify. I'm just going to let y'all know that the link off of the meeting page for Zooming is not working. So people have to know how to plug numbers in. So if I'm the only one here, that might be why. That's it.
That's great. I think a number of us kind of picked up on that. So we'll fix that internally, work through that issue for the next meeting. Thank you for attending to let us know that. Any others? All right. Then let's move on to work session items. The next item on the work session is an update on the comprehensive plan implementation project.
Thank you, commissioners. A brief update to where we are, a monthly update on this project. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Is everyone seeing a presentation? I hope.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Let me just go to the Okay, great. Thanks very much. Again, Vera Coley, Senior Planner and Project Manager for the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Project. What you see here is our updated schedule for where we are in the project. Again, the focus of this phase of comprehensive plan implementation is housing, but we're also including related changes to parking requirements in residential areas and tree protection and preservation related to residential land. The outcome are code amendments that balance the city's goals for 40% tree canopy and implementation of the housing policies outlined in the comprehensive plan and compliance with House Bill 2001. Right now, we are entering the middle phase of the project, which is what we're calling code concepts. It's going to take place between now and mid-April. This phase is going to inform the code amendments themselves that are scheduled to be ready for adoption starting in about mid-June. Not full adoption in mid-June, but we're going to start that process in mid-June. The February 18th CPIC or committee meeting was rescheduled to this coming Thursday due to the power and internet outages everywhere. So tonight's update doesn't include any of that committee feedback on the materials that we presented. We included the full CPIC packet with this staff report. So you have all the materials that CPIC received and that they will be discussing on Thursday. So this update won't include any of that committee feedback. Again, the policy mandates for this project are to increase the supply of middle housing in the city and to provide housing choice throughout the city. We're also mandated to increase the tree canopy and preservation of existing trees in the city and also to manage parking to enable middle housing and protect trees. So we have a sandwich of mandates here related to housing, trees, and parking because they all go together. One of the key ideas that we're working on or with now in this phase is this idea of a livability code, so that we talk about or we're working on how this code creates livability within our neighborhoods and on our streets and in our neighborhoods. The city zoning as it exists today doesn't implement the comprehensive plan, and the zoning code with the amendments as improvements would intentionally regulate form to optimize the policy mandates and focus on form so that what we're thinking about is a form-based approach. It's not entirely foreign to Milwaukie to use a form-based approach that's looking at things such as lot coverage, side yard height plane, setbacks. So we already look at kind of the form of how development happens on our lots right now. So we're already using those approaches. So maximum height is one of those things as well. So we want to kind of continue that as we're thinking about or working on changing and amending the housing types that are permitted throughout the city in the zones. We also want to obviously think about maximizing trees, both preservation as well as replacement or new plantings, minimizing on-site pavement, and again, focusing on the form that development takes, not necessarily the zone in which it's happening. And that's part of the mandate from House Bill 2001 as well. So there are a variety of code amendments or types of code amendments that we're thinking about as part of the project in this phase of code concepts. So we're going to be looking at some new ways of structuring the code and writing the code updates. And and through these updates, we'll be adopting and implementing the policy mandates that I talked about. 6 draft code concepts have been identified as part of our process, and those were detailed in the staff report, as well as the code concepts memorandum that was part of the CPIC packet that you all received. And these encapsulate kind of the big picture thinking about how we're approaching restructuring the code to foster the vision in the city. I'm going to briefly talk about a couple of these tonight, simplifying the number of zones, and then thinking about on-site parking requirements, just as part of this update. But again, all of these were detailed as part of the staff report and the CPIC packet that was part of your staff report packet tonight. So one of the things that we're looking at is this idea of simplifying the number of residential zones. This isn't something that's the number of residential zones isn't a mandate or a requirement of House Bill 2001, but what is required by House Bill 2001 are amendments that allow more housing types in all of our zones. And what we have found and what we've known for a while working, within the city with all of the different zones and the lots there is that lot size does not necessarily exactly correspond to the zoning district. But housing types would be permitted wherever suitably sized lots exist. That's part of the mandate of House Bill 2001. So for example, quadplexes are one of the middle housing types that House Bill 2001 talks about. And they would be permitted on any lot which provides the minimum lot area of 7,000 square feet, as outlined in the House Bill, no matter what zone it's in. So it's kind of something to think about that, it's really the housing type and the lot size that govern kind of what goes together, not necessarily the zone in which they're finding themselves. So this is something that we'll be discussing with CPIC on Thursday. And the form of these things, like a quadplex, for example, are going to be regulated through standards just like housing or any of these structures are being regulated now. Maximum height, setbacks, lot coverage, minimum vegetation on the lot. We already have a lot of these kinds of standards that sort of create that building envelope on the lot. So while we may be thinking about, as part of these code amendments, a quadplex or a triplex on a lot that right now might only allow a single family home, I think what we're trying to think about and consider as part of all of this discussion with the committee and with the public is that box that is that single unit home right now wouldn't necessarily change to accommodate a new housing type. That box stays the same, the setbacks, the maximum height, lot coverage, all of those things. What we're trying to do is broaden the options of what kind of units or how many units might be in that box. So when we think about kind of development in these various zones, it's not uncommon for someone to maybe not realize what zone they're even in, or for an R7 zone or a street in an R7 zone that has a minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet doesn't necessarily feel that different from an R5 zone, for example. You're walking down the street and all of those things like setbacks and building height and lot coverage are all proportional to the lot size, but they may not feel all that different when you're walking down the street. So one of the things that we're thinking about as options of working with the way our residential zones are laid out is this idea of making the code amendments and leaving all of the zones like they are. And we have 8 residential zones right now in the city. So we would make the code amendments that we need to be able to allow for these various housing types throughout the city and all of the zones, but we wouldn't actually change the number of zones. But another option that that are as part of this discussion that we'll be having with CPIC is this idea of compressing or simplifying the number of zones. And maybe we have 3 zones. So we have a large lot zone, which would be the R10 right now, a medium lot zone, which would be the R7 and the R5 zones kind of combined, and then a small lot zone, which would have all of what we currently call our medium to high density zones. And then that's a zone, because if we're regulating housing type by lot size, not necessarily the zone, because these various housing types have to be permitted everywhere, then maybe we don't need this many zones, because maybe these zones don't actually do a lot for us. And do they really matter? Particularly also because what we also see are that even if someone's in an R5, they may have a 7,000 square foot lot. Like, not all of the lots in any given zone are that minimum size, right? They're all kinds of different sizes because our zoning, we've changed our zoning. We've made map amendments, we've done other things, but the lots underneath haven't actually necessarily changed. And then the third option in this idea of simplifying the number of zones is it's a little more radical, and it's this notion of housing type is regulated by minimum lot size only, and we don't have a whole bunch of different residential zones. We have 1 residential zone. And so the housing type is regulated solely by the minimum lot size, as opposed to what zone we find it in. So it's something to think about, something to talk about, but it's just this bigger picture discussion about what do our various zones even mean? What should they mean? And is there a better way to be thinking about these housing types throughout the city, given our policy mandates both from a comprehensive plan to provide more housing choice throughout the city, but also House Bill 2001, which is regulating the housing types by lot sizes throughout the city. So it's going to be an interesting discussion, I think. And, you know, there may be some benefits to sort of streamlining the zoning, at least as it relates to the residential zones. So I think that will be a fun discussion. And then one of the other things I just wanted to touch base with you folks about is amending our parking requirements. This is required by House Bill 2001 to make sure that we're not requiring more parking than the House Bill allows. But we've got some options on how we think about parking requirements. One space per, for each dwelling unit, but maybe we think about amending the location of that space. We've talked about this before, and we've seen it here for a couple of different variances that have come before this commission in the past about our current code requiring the one off-street parking space be outside the front yard setback. So if you have a house that's built at its front yard setback, that requires them to have a garage, or something to the side, a parking space to the side. But we've had, I think it was a couple 3 years ago, a house that had converted their garage into living space, which meant that they no longer had their legal required off-street parking space because it was in fact in the front yard, even though it was in the driveway. So that's, one of the things to think about is giving folks or properties a little more flexibility in the location of that required space. We could think about allowing on-street parking to count towards that minimum requirement in certain situations. We could have no minimum off-street parking and only have a maximum off-street parking requirement, or we could allow a higher maximum due to certain street conditions. So there are a lot of options in how we think about requiring parking for housing of middle housing or, single dwelling housing as well. So we have some options and we have some flexibility in how we think about it depending on where it is. And by that, I mean, not just location on the site itself, but also what does the street look like? Is it built out that there is on-street parking, or is that something that the developer would need to build? But it's that flexibility when we think about it. I think it was at the last update that I provided, there was that discussion about trade-offs. And so if there is a particularly mature, lovely tree on the property, maybe the trade-off is, well, then we're going to put that parking space on the street because we want to make sure that we keep that tree. So there's different ways that we could think about the code to allow for some flexibility in that site design and the site development to get what we want or to get more of what we want, which is why, as part of this whole discussion on housing, we included trees and parking as part of it, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to think about one without the other two, because they all affect one another. So to the extent that we can create a code that is clear and objective, but also provides flexibility, that's what we're aiming at. So the next steps in this project, again, we have our meeting with CPIC on Thursday to talk about code concepts and to talk about all of these issues. We've added an hour to the CPIC meetings, so they're from 6 to 9 now because there's a lot to talk about. And believe me, we are filling up every minute. That's a packed agenda for sure. But we have a nearly more than an hour long interactive exercise as part of working through all of these discussion items. So we have breakout groups that we'll be having, and with the CPIC committee members themselves, as well as members from the public. So like we did the last time, so folks can really work through some of these key questions that we're asking about how to move forward with these code concepts as we prepare for the big community engagement event that's going to be happening later in March. We're going to be talking about, again, these clear and objective standards, housing types defined by form as opposed to the zone, trade-offs, again, with parking and trees, and where on that spectrum of minimum compliance or bold in our code amendments, or how we're thinking about it. That's part of this overall discussion that we'll be having with the committee on Thursday. And then in the background, we're also working on refining these code concepts over the next couple of weeks. And we'll be planning our next big public engagement event that's going to be in a couple of different forms. We are going to have an Engage Milwaukie online virtual open house event, but then we will also be doing what we're calling a meeting in a box, and we'll be meeting with NDAs and some other smaller groups for virtual small group discussions about these topics as well. So we'll be getting folks to engage either on the Engage Milwaukie website or in sort of in-person virtual meetings. And then parallel to all this, we had a residential parking study done by Rick Williams. And so the results of that are still in process, but they did some used some neighborhoods and did a inventory of available parking in representative neighborhoods. And then they went back and did a utilization study as well in sort of mid-morning and in the middle of the night, so they could see what's happening with parking in a variety of neighborhoods. So we had a better sense of what's happening on the ground in these residential neighborhoods when it comes to parking, both street parking and on-site parking. So again, here's our timeline. So we're here in mid to late February. And again, we're prepping for our big community engagement event coming up later in March. I'm scheduled to be before you again with another update on March 23rd. So I'll be able to give you another update and let you know sort of where we are with the CPIC process, and then to give you a preview of the community engagement event as well, so that we can get folks to participate in that online virtual open house as well. So that's where we are with this project. There's so much happening. It's kind of unbelievable. But it's been a really great discussion and work effort with CPIC. And we always have quite a few folks from the public attending our CPIC meetings as well. So that's been great to get their feedback. And so I'm really looking forward to Thursday's discussion to really get into the weeds on some of these big ideas and big topics. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And if you have any questions about where we are or what we're doing, happy to answer them if I can.
Chair Roosevelt, may I make some comments? So Vera, the libertarian in me loves the idea of, look, I always say this, if I was king, right? If I was the only one to make a decision, I would say all you need is 3 zones: residential, mixed use, and industrial. Right. And you allow your mixed use would be on your major arteries, your industrial and parks, and then whatever you want on your residential, as long as you can make it fit. So I love the 1 zone concept. The conservative in me, though, understands, and probably your city council liaison believes that the way a street and the way that a house sits back is really important. To me, I would love a laissez-faire attitude, and it would probably make this a lot easier in the long run, but it would become the wild, wild west. So I understand that. One thing that I would love to have you look at is the flag lot requirements. And this is why I tell you, because typically I have a 10,000 square foot lot, which we built a 1,500 square foot house because 1, we're cheap, and 2, because we're not monsters. We don't need a house bigger than that, right? For 2 people. But we all know that the market is going to make as big as a house as possible that can sit on a lot. But really, if my house was just turned the other way so that my front door wasn't facing the street, we could have gotten in 2 1,500 square foot houses into those flag lots. Or you maybe even be able to squeeze in 3. And I think that's where a lot of the lot development, is going to happen, is in these flag lots. So I would seriously take a look at what those flag lot standards are, because 30 feet from, the back of that, 30 feet, your door has to be 30 feet away from the back line of the other property. And you still need 15 feet in the back. But if we could, maneuver those things, and a lot of those flag lots have big trees in them too. So maybe that would make it a little bit easier and make the land more desirable for the person that owns a bigger lot in the back to sell it out to somebody too, which would cause more development as well. So I would look at that. And My only thing about parking is if you were to drive up and down my street, we have mud puddles from the mailman or mail carrier, driving up and sticking the mail into it, because everybody's yard comes straight out to the street, right? We don't have curbs, we don't have sidewalks, so everybody's real hesitant to park right in what feels like somebody's yard, which is still the right of way. So if you get two cars on the street, park on that way, there's no way to get a vehicle in there because, the roads are, fairly narrow as it is anyway. So I hope that we look at some sort of, if there is curb and sidewalk, or if there is curb, that built to the end of the right of way, or it's paved, even if we're to make the contractor pave it or put in a bulb out or something like that. I know we're trying to reduce pavement, or gravel it, whatever it is, just to make sure that, we're not blocking all these side streets that are typical in Milwaukie without the curb. Those are my only comments, and thank you for sending all that information. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and it seems like that Vice Chair Edge is doing an excellent job steering that committee along with city staff. So thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Appreciate it. And the flag lot standards are definitely part of our overall review of what we're doing. So thanks for pointing that out.
Chair Loosevelt, could I make some comments? First of all, just let me make a statement that I really appreciate all the work that the CPIC is doing. They really have a big task ahead of them, and I really appreciate all their effort. But, I was intrigued by the three zoning options, and my first reaction was, 8-1, that's a big step, and maybe 8-3 is sort of the mid-course solution. But the more I thought about it, the more intrigued I was about the one zone. Because one of the things I've come from, this last year is assumptions kind of get thrown out the window with change. And from my perspective, I would ask, Vera, from my perspective, going to one zone seems to be that gives you the max flexibility for unforeseen change. Is that an accurate assumption?
I think the way I would answer that is what it means is that we'd be regulating housing by lot size and other factors rather than this mapped geographic area. There is a layer that we can't forget about, at least the way our existing code works, is that our medium and high density zones, the R3 and smaller, there are some other housing types like multifamily housing that are in there that are not in our lower density housing, in lower density zones. We also allow some commercial uses as a conditional use in our higher density zones. So it just adds another thing that we just need to think about. If we went down to one residential zone, we would have to think about how would we still allow those commercial or higher intensity residential uses in certain areas. So I'm not sure that we can get away from having at least one other residential zone that can start incorporating some of that additional density or commercial uses as a conditional use, or we just have to think about how do we deal with that? How do we account for those?
Yeah, I think that there could still be a way to handle things like setbacks that
sure. Yes.
Commissioner Emer has brought up that makes sense, that don't necessarily have to be, zone dependent.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. No,
and
I think
would you,
great.
And just one other question, would you clarify for me, I admit that I got a little bit confused reading the parking because it was mentioned several times and I came away with different messages depending on what part I was reading. So is the one parking space per residential unit, is that a limit of one per dwelling unit?
So we can think about that as a minimum, that you have to provide one per unit. It could also be a maximum as well. So our code can think about it, either way. What we can't do is require more parking, for the middle housing types than we require for single unit homes. So that's kind of that compliance, piece of it to make sure that we're there. But the one per unit can be a minimum or a maximum.
Okay.
Or both.
Yeah. And I just kind of had to come to, some different thinking on my own from the last year, because basically people moved away from public transport in the last year for, obvious reasons and that kind of thing. And so, I think there's dangers of, I just think that this is going to be a difficult one to challenge, because I just think that, we've seen a lot of things that have kind of thrown out much of the conventional wisdom over the last year. So that's why I asked the question. Mm-hmm. So it can be a limit, but it could also be, okay. So yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I know I get to participate on Thursday, and so I wasn't going to take a whole lot of time to throw my opinion out tonight. But I did want to kind of offer my view on the consolidation of the residential zones really quick, just in case there's any discussion might come out of that from this group that I could carry with me into that meeting on Thursday. It really feels to me like, rather than, regulating by the lot size that is present, at the time of development, that what we're really talking about regulating is kind of, is lot coverage, and so these large lot zones occur in areas where we want a lower site coverage. And so the R10 is in a lot of cases where there's, natural resources, on or close to the site, or in hazard areas. And so these are areas where you're mandating larger lot sizes, larger minimum lot sizes in order to effectively prevent too much site coverage. And so it feels to me like that's the concept that we're regulating here. And so in an R5, or in an R3, zone, we're really saying in these zones you can have greater site coverage. And so it doesn't really matter what the lot size is right now. Someone's going to come in and propose development. It may include land division. It may include a planned development. It may include being condominiums, or it might be rentals. We don't know, necessarily, and we don't necessarily need to be regulating that either. But we are the policy intersection with a minimum lot size standard is how much land do you want open versus covered with development. So that's really what I think that we should, just be explicit about that. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And so in these areas where we already are zoned for larger lot sizes because of natural hazards or because of natural resource areas, we want a lesser site coverage. And so, you have a 10,000 square foot lot, then you might be able to put a quadplex on there, but it can only be 35% site coverage, right? If you're in an R5 zone and you have a 10,000 square foot lot and you want to put a quadplex on there, it can have a 50%, 55% site coverage, and so it's really the lot size isn't really all that relevant. It's how much of the area do you want to preserve as open space, whether it's private open space or public open space or even, again, we have these situations where, you have a planned development or you have a subdivision where, there's large tracts of commonly owned, or land, and the lot sizes can then be smaller than what the zone is because, part of what you're doing is you're just doing, a division of lot size by, the number of dwellings that are allowed in that zone. And the lot sizes can be completely different from what that might suggest if you just divided it by the square footage or the acreage of the site. So anyway, I feel like we should just be explicit about what it is that we're trying to accomplish by having zones, and then regulate to that. And I had a thought on the parking thing too, a little bit, like when we're talking, because I agree, I know there's concerns with underdeveloped or unimproved streets, no curb and everything. And it strikes me that if we're going to allow you to count on street parking spaces towards your, your minimum or whatever, that maybe you need to have a curb. Maybe it needs to be formalized. Maybe, depending on the situation, maybe you need to have a permit. Maybe you need to be in a permit parking district or, a parking permit district in order to count those on-street spaces, because parking utilization study shows that it's totally saturated. And no one would be able to count on actually having that space available unless there was a permit district that made sure that there was, a certain number of spaces that would be available for permit holders. That was another concept I just wanted to throw out there. But I was more interested in talking about the first thing.
Chair Losfeld, if I may. Vice Chair Edge, I appreciate you kind of mentioning the idea of kind of parking districts or parking permits. It was kind of a thing that just like it was nagging in the back of my mind as I was kind of reading through that, especially thinking if you're going to be pushing more offsite onto the street, there might become kind of that moment when it makes sense, and that moment might come sooner than later. And so just I think keeping that as part of the conversation, I think could be really beneficial. And I think as it was kind of, and it might have even been in the CPIC kind of piece of the memo, it also talks about how pricing the use of the right-of-way encourages people to think about whether or not they want to use the right-of-way in that sort of way to begin with, which I think helps us advance our larger climate goals around mode shift and around reducing reliance on single occupancy vehicles. So I just wanted to kind of jump in on that. I guess Vera had a question kind of following up from Commissioner Massey's question on going down to kind of one residential zone. I'm actually looking at the zoning map and was just kind of realizing, like, if we took all of the R zones and kind of consolidated that out into one, we would still have kind of commercial and mixed use as its own category. And, neighborhood hubs lives in that. A lot of downtown which also allows for housing, lives in that. So from a residential zoning perspective, it seems like you could maybe just say, take it all down to one, and then think about kind of some of those pieces around kind of coverage. And as Joseph was saying, I do think I'd want us to be thoughtful to some extent on that lot coverage, recognizing that while I agree that there are some natural hazards out there on some of the larger lots, and there are kind of, amenity, kind of ecological amenities on some of those larger lots, some of these larger lots are also, a byproduct of zoning, which at times has been weaponized for race, class, segregation kind of purposes historically. And so kind of further codifying that, I think we should ask ourselves whether or not that's something we want to be doing. So I think those were some things, and also on the parking, just because it's like the drum I often beat on the electric vehicle charging side of things. Again, I mean, since I think we last met, President Biden is pushing aggressively on electric vehicles. General Motors just came out saying they're going to transition to 100% electric vehicle fleets by 2035. And the existing research on electric vehicles is people charge first and foremost at their house. The second place they charge is at their work. And so I think we should be thinking about this, and maybe it's part of an update where we mandate if that one spot is going to be on property, you should also be putting in the infrastructure to think about the transition to electric vehicles, because it's cheaper to do it today than it is 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think that's kind of some of my thoughts. I think this is really exciting, and I look forward to kind of continuing to track the project as it moves.
Chair, if I may, I want to add on to some. So I look at the world in a different way than Vice Chair Edge does. The way that if I were king, right, I would highly protect our wildlife habitat corridors and highly protect our riverways and not allow any building to go on in those areas, which then we don't have to, and keep them out of the natural hazard areas too. So then you just block that land out, right? So then you don't have to worry about, oh, these larger lots have all this on here. That would be my first step. Then my second step would be, okay, how does development happen? It doesn't happen because the city regulates it to happen. It's because the land has value and somebody's going to develop it to maximize out their revenue on that project. That is why we see bigger houses on these smaller lots, because they've got to maximize out the square footage, right, to get the most bang for their buck, to make the most money. So if we look at it this way, that even if we allowed 1,000 square foot lots, right, and if somebody wanted to come in on a 10,000 square foot lot and build a whole bunch of 800 square foot houses, right, which then gets us to our lower dollar amount, but it's what the market's going to drive. Realistically, the market is going to drive what desire this is, and that's what they're going to build. So we can dream and write in all these laws no matter what, but if we ignore market tendencies, right, we are going to end up with a future of undesirable land, because and then we're going to go through this whole step process all over again. So that's why I love this laissez-faire attitude. Let the market kind of determine what it wants to build. Allow whatever you want on these, and let your lot size be whatever you want, as long as it fits into the box. And that's how you're going to maximize out the amount of building that you got. And so I personally look at it from an economic point of view, especially that since, the market is going to demand the housing type. And so if we allow the market to free a lot slower, I will say deregulate, but I won't scare anybody by using that word. But if we allow the market to, flow a lot freer and let the developer make these choices on what's going to sell, we would be much better off as a city. And then we'll get in a lot of these duplexes, a lot smaller homes, and we'll get some bigger homes too, because some people are going to want to build a bigger house on a bigger lot. But if we protect our wildlife corridors or our wildlife, swap from, and we get a scientist out there to actually measure it. I don't want to whine through a parking lot saying that's a wildlife corridor. Protect, a certain amount of feet away from the rivers and the creeks, and keep the housing out of the flood zones. That will help us protect trees, and then you can give some sort of bonuses. For example, right? I agree with the electric vehicles, and my whole fear is that everybody's going to have an electrical cord running out to the street, right? So really, so you can give bonuses. So if you put more houses onto a smaller or onto a lot, right, and smaller houses or more affordable houses, you get some sort of bonus, like your SDC fees are taken away, or we'll provide you an upgraded electric box for a 220 box to be able to plug in your electric vehicle, and those kind of things. I'd much rather incentivize things than regulate it to form and function to get the desire what you want, because if the market doesn't want it, it will never, ever happen. So that's my point of view.
Hello, can I jump in here? Okay. So I just have a few things. I agree with the incentivizing rather than adding more red tape onto everything. I just wanted to touch on a couple things. number one, how does the zones or the different zones affect noise ordinances? Because I know from my communication with the public, noise levels and what I know that I think that they're based off of the different zoning kind of types of codes. And so my concern is I would love to see, like a martini bar or something like that in downtown. And if I live downtown, those new apartments are probably built to like kind of withstand that type of noise and that type of, street activity and all of that. But if we're putting in a different type, of mixed use kind of in a different zone, that maybe it's rented out for a restaurant or, something that's open a little later, or how does that affect, the sound of different neighborhoods? That would be one of my questions is what are the noise ordinances based off of? Are they based off of the zoning type, and if we change the zoning types, how does that affect? Because noise is a huge issue for our neighbors. That's one of the sanity things for our community. So that would be one kind of just thought process that I'd like to explore, or at least kind of know about. And then I wanted to touch on the tree canopy coverage again. I know I keep kind of saying the fires concern me because obviously more tree canopy coverage and we're going to have more weather events, extreme weather events like this happening and over the next 20 years. And the more that tree branches like this are kind of interfering, or obviously power lines being underground and different things can help with this, but we just saw an extreme weather event and we're dealing with now the branches and the trees. And so I just want to kind of address like, what are some of the impacts of having so many different types of trees or so much canopy coverage? Also, how does that affect solar in different areas, shading? So solar, obviously the fires to me is a concern. And then now the ice storms with the branches breaking. And I mean, not only just the power outages, but also it was dangerous. I mean, like property damage all over the place. And I do obviously think that environmentally it is better to have more trees and, more canopy coverage. I understand the intention behind all of that, but the reality also is that we probably will have more fires and we probably will have more extreme weather events like we just had. And so protecting people too is important, and thinking about that and what we're planning for the next 20 years is also just something to consider and factor in. I just wanted to touch base on the commercial use too. And I don't know all of the different codes and what all the requirements are. But I just counted today and there's 10 open commercial spaces just in Milwaukie Marketplace alone. And obviously, I think with this whole shift with the pandemic, people are working from home more. They're, utilizing workspaces differently, online differently. There's just a lot of different, so what's the need for commercial space? Number one. Number two, clearly I have heard from the community that there's need and want to rent out commercial space, but it's too expensive. And for whatever reason, there's property owners that are, willing to not have anybody rent there, or maybe by requirement. I don't know what exactly the problem is, but I just know that we have a ton of open commercial real estate space right now. And we do have community members that would love to start businesses or use that space, but they can't afford it. And there's an abundance of it. And so when we're talking about new development, especially in areas where I could literally count that there's already 10 open spaces within just half a mile of that area, and we're talking about new development being required to have a commercial space, what's the trade-off, I guess, or how are we factoring in? I understand like future growth and stuff, but it's just maybe more maybe more residential space would be a better use than just commercial space, or figuring out, I don't know. I just would like more information, or I suppose I can look up some of that information, but I would like to explore that or more information on that too. And then I'll just touch real quick. Within 20 years, I would say 20, 25 at the most, it is very likely that we will be on almost half the population, at least in advanced areas, will be on a subscription self-driving car type basis. So I think that it's admirable, and I think we do have to plan for charging stations at individual homes and stuff. But within 20, 25 years, self-driving cars will be way more prominent and will be a part of our society. It's being worked in very slowly right now with self-driving car or with cars that have automatic braking and all of that stuff, but it will happen eventually. And in that case, it will be more of like an Uber call, or a Lyft call from your phone where your self-driving car comes and picks you up and you pay a monthly subscription. And then that self-driving car goes and docks itself at a high-rise type of a station and charges itself there. And that's most likely the direction of things in the next 20, 25 years as far as transportation goes. And so I just think that it's not a bad idea to kind of factor that in when we're talking about parking. I mean, it is still a ways away. It could be sooner if we're, really speedy about it, but that's the track that we're on. And so when we're planning for parking and when we're planning for charging stations, we just have to kind of keep in mind that that's the track that we're on. And people will likely not have individual cars as much. They'll have subscriptions. And I think a lot more, particularly women, will use that, because right now for a lot of women and a lot of people in general, using Lyft or using Uber sometimes is just uncomfortable because of that human factor, because you're getting in a stranger's car, because they know now where you live or where you're going. And when you kind of take that element or that piece out of it, and it's more just a vehicle that's driving you somewhere, it will shift, I think, the way that people use that space. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kashrabadi, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, actually, I had a couple of questions. In regard, I don't know if this is something that's being discussed later on, but as we discuss the zoning, but also thinking about maybe requirements on building materials, if we really want to talk about the effects of climate change. I know there's a lot of new and innovative ideas out there that are actually functional, in terms of materials that are being used that are a lot more climate friendly. And I don't know if we would maybe incentivize something for developers to use that, or if we would make it a requirement for certain size building lots. But also maybe as Commissioner Edge was discussing in terms of the open space, maybe that could be if let's say they can't get to the required minimum open space, if that's the route we go, maybe that's something that they can do in lieu of that, is making the building in whole more greener. Just something else to think about as well. I do like the idea of the 3 zones, and I do like the idea of having it just kind of open, because I do feel like that can help drive a lot of economic growth. So I'm interested in seeing where this goes, and I do also like the information that Commissioner Sherman brought up, and I understand what Commissioner Ert was saying, especially considering the climate situation that we're currently in, as we're seeing the effects of it right now, being more thoughtful in terms of how we build these new developments and make sure that we really get this right, so we're not looking back 40 years later thinking that we should have, could have, would have. But I'm excited to get to work on this.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Vera, I think that was a lot of feedback to kind of take in, and a lot of different areas that everybody is touching on. I think we're all coming to this from different perspectives and different backgrounds, but I'm sure the variety of discussion here is not unlike what you're going to be finding from the rest of the public and from the CPIC in general. So I just would only add that my 2 cents is that I hope that we are looking very closely at precedent. I know that when I approach a situation where we've got a variety of different ideas to discuss and perspectives to include, history has a lot to say and can really guide us, particularly when we have different backgrounds merging on certain topics. So I would just really encourage that in any opportunity we can, we're kind of developing this story, this narrative through case studies, through precedent, and recognizing in a transparent way where things have failed, both here in the city of Milwaukee and some of our other sister cities. And we should not be, cautioned against being real with where we've had successes and where we've had failures. And so I just appreciate it if we could frame it along those lines. I think that's it for the work session. If there are no other comments from commissioners, I think we can move on then to other business. Vera, unless you have anything else you'd like to add.
No, I just thank you so much for everyone's feedback. I really appreciate it. That's why, we calendared this, that, every month to kind of keep you folks, on, so you see where we're going and what's been happening, because this is all coming to you in the form of, a lot of nerdy code language. So I really appreciate all of you, taking the time to review the material and giving feedback. This is great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I think one of the things that I'm thinking through too is that the commissioners may not get direct responses to some of the questions or concerns that are raised. But, part of what Commissioner Edge is doing is hoping, finding the opportunity to represent us and represent these perspectives when the opportunity arises. So it may not be that the feedback you get on any given question you've raised is immediate, but certainly that's where Commissioner Edge's experience is invaluable. So we look to him for that. Okay, other business. Do commissioners or staff have any other business or updates that they would like to share with the group? Okay, Commissioner Heemner, go ahead.
I believe the City Blue Hall Ribbon Committee is having their final deal on tomorrow night. And it's been a great experience. So thank you, Ms. Wicks and Mr. Stauffer, for their wonderful guidance in this. We've learned quite a bit, and we are making our final recommendation. And then a couple of them are going to carry on to the RFP portion of it, which is the request for public
proposal.
Either buying the building or leasing it out. I don't know if that's been determined yet, but at any rate, so we're going to have a great meeting on Wednesday, and the public is welcome to join. And speaking of Wednesdays,
wait a minute.
Reading Library and Milwaukee Historical Society, along with City of Milwaukee, Willamette Falls Studio, and Facebook group Milwaukee Chit Chat are proud to continue the Reading Library lecture series with a women's conversation about community, which is Wednesday, March 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Listen and join in the conversation with some of Milwaukee's leaders, Raging Grannies Cheryl Wampler, former mayor and state rep Carolyn Tomei, District 41 rep Corinne Power, Milwaukee 2017 Volunteer of the Year Lisa Gunyon-Rinker, Milwaukee City Councilor Lisa Beatty, and it will be hosted by Milwaukee Historical Society board member Linda Carr. In a casual conversation setting, our guests will discuss topics like community, involvement, and what makes Milwaukee a special place. They will answer questions or discuss items that are presented by you in the Zoom chat. Because of our partners, there are a variety of ways to watch and participate in the discussion. By using the Zoom link available on the city and library website, www.milwaukeeoregon.gov, you can ask questions in the chat feature during the live broadcast. You can watch live on Comcast Channel 30, which according to Josh will be running by then. We believe in you, Josh. City of Milwaukee YouTube page, or live stream on Facebook group Milwaukee Chit Chat 97222 and 97267. Please check city website for link and more details. There's my PSA for you, Chair. Now that you're Chair, I got a sneak of it.
Yeah. I was going to say, I almost had to take a motion to extend the meeting for that one. Anybody else? Anything else? No? All right. Oh,
Quick, this is actually a question for Commissioner Edge. I believe, if I'm remembering, you might be involved in that kind of the Metro funded Oak Grove, Oak Lodge study. I know that's fairly out of the purview of Planning Commission, but would just be curious maybe about hearing more on that. And we could also connect offline if you think that's more appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really city business, and so I'd be happy to connect with you privately about that. Certainly, if the commission is interested in knowing about the progress and or results of a Metro-funded study that is looking at the feasibility or possibility of a large portion of unincorporated Clackamas County to the south of the city, either annexing or incorporating on its own versus doing nothing and continuing as it is. That's what that study is looking into. Just to kind of compare, side by side what the costs would be under those different scenarios. I am involved in the steering committee providing oversight of that. And so, again, it's not really city business, but, I'm sure that if, that Laura would be able to, provide some updates on that periodically if that was of interest to the commission. And then if any of you want to connect with me privately, I'd be happy to discuss with you in greater detail.
Thanks.
May I ask, Vice Chair, is that annexation into Milwaukie or annexation into Gladstone?
The first phase of study is looking at Milwaukie, although future phases, if funding is secured, could look at Gladstone and just present those side-by-side comparisons.
interesting.
So since it does kind of fall into city business, if we have a slow period and we want to discuss, I would, Chair, I guess it's up to you, but I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit about it.
Okay. Any other business? Any other items, Laura?
We just wanted to go over the forecast for the future meetings, I think, before we head out.
Yes,
We
please.
don't have anything scheduled for March 9th, so we'll be sending out a cancellation for that meeting. Then I also sent meeting invites on everybody's calendar to the Planning Commission meetings, and so that might be helpful when we do cancel them. I can send out a cancellation so it's just clear. I just did that a couple weeks ago. Then on the 23rd, we've got the Hillside preliminary PD coming in with Vera. Pretty excited about that. And then we're going to have another update from Vera on the comp plan implementation. And Brett will be back with more on the central Milwaukie bikeways connection with what the recommendation has come out of the consultant and talking a little bit about that. And just so you know, we're going out to the public next week through Engage Milwaukie to get some feedback on the preferred bike route. So if you know that folks are interested in biking, please let them know that that's going to be coming out next week. And then this says April 13th for the first hearing for Coho Point. That is likely to get moved to the 27th. It's not insured right now, but I have a feeling it's going to be moved to the 27th, just so you know. So those are all very exciting projects that are coming before you. You guys are getting some really interesting, great stuff to add and talk about for the city of Milwaukie. So I'm excited about it.
Laura, I'm actually surprised that we don't have agenda items because it feels like we've been so stacked. And then to have, weeks pass by where we don't have any agenda items. I'm curious because I know we talked about future meetings somehow starting to meet more with the neighborhood associations. We talked about, we also have this oversight committee that we wanted to engage in trying to find a process for that as well. So it seems like there are topics that, although we don't have a project that we're reviewing,
Yes.
We could start to filter into those evenings and maybe see a couple of those items.
We do need to get the joint meeting between you all and the NDA scheduled. That is definitely something that needs to happen. And I will start to think about when we can get that plugged in. And then for the CIAC, we haven't gone to the city council to discuss that yet. And again, that got pushed yet again because of the weather. It seems like we just keep getting knocked back every single time we try to schedule that. So right now we were supposed to have that, and that would have kind of set the stage for a conversation about that. But now we're not having that conversation until April. So I think we need to hear what the city council has to say about that, and then we can kind of take it from there. But the NDA joint meeting, I think, is a good one to get on the agenda. Yes.
Okay. I think that's it. Let's see. And now page 2. Oh, it says adjourn. I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
All right, so I will give $5 to everybody who waits until 9:59 to make that motion.
$5. You are cheap, Greg.
Right?
Oh my gosh. And under my watch, we will not see a meeting that goes past.
We know that. So we got to talk faster, I guess. So,
That's right. And we're going to have to limit your PSAs.
Right. Well, those are going away. I got to sneak them in. So I will make a motion to adjourn.
Any seconds?
A second.
Full second.
All right. It's been motioned and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. It's unanimous. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Have a good one.
Right.